I came home from a business trip to find strangers living in my house, sipping wine on my porch like it was their weekend getaway. The sheriff didn't believe me. My name was on the deed, but so was hers. That's when I realized Karen had stolen my life, one forged signature at a time. I got back to North Carolina late on a humid Thursday night, dragging my suitcase across the cracked asphalt of my driveway, already dreaming about a cold beer in my own bed. The crickets were loud enough to drown out my footsteps, and for a second everything felt just like before. Quiet, peaceful, untouched. Until I noticed the car parked right in front of my garage, a silver Toyota I'd never seen before. The license plate wasn't local. At first I thought maybe it was a delivery or someone turning around. Then I saw the lights on inside my living room. Not the soft glow of a lamp left on by mistake. No. This was the full, warm, careless brightness of people who don't pay the electric bill. I stood there for a good 5 seconds, my brain refusing to connect the dots. Then laughter drifted out from the porch, young voices, music playing from somewhere inside. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white and tried the front door. Locked. That was strange enough since I never locked it when I traveled for work. But what really made my stomach drop was the faint click of a new lock, a keypad I had never installed. I knocked once, twice, nothing. On the third try, a guy in a faded baseball cap opened the door just wide enough to poke his head out. He had a beer in one hand and the kind of casual grin that belongs to someone who believes the world owes him comfort. "Hey, man," he said. "You the cleaning guy? We're good for towels." I blinked. "The cleaning guy? This is my house." He chuckled like I'd told a joke. "Yeah, sure, buddy. Look, we rented this place fair and square, all right? Paid for the week on Airbnb. You can check with Karen, she's handling it." The name hit me like static in my chest. Karen. The self-appointed president of our HOA, a woman who'd once fined someone for having the wrong shade of mailbox. Before I could reply, the door clicked shut again, and I was left staring at my own reflection in the glass. Rumpled shirt, suitcase in hand, looking more like a burglar than a homeowner. My first call was to the sheriff's office. They said they'd send someone out. The second call, against my better judgment, was to Karen. She answered on the second ring, her voice honey-sweet and rehearsed. "Oh, Josh, you're back early. We thought you were still away on business." "Karen, there are strangers in my house," I snapped. "They said they rented it through Airbnb." There was a long pause. "Ah, yes, that. I took the liberty of arranging a short-term management agreement while you were gone. The property looked abandoned, and we can't have empty homes attracting squatters, can we?" "Management agreement?" I nearly shouted. "With whose permission?" "Well, with yours, dear. You signed a proxy authorization form before you left, remember? I filed it with the HOA for safekeeping." I didn't remember any such thing. But before I could argue, a pair of headlights washed over my driveway. The sheriff had arrived. A tall man in tan uniform stepped out, radio on his shoulder hissing. I tried to explain what was happening, showed him my ID, even pulled up the digital copy of my property deed. He studied it, then looked at Karen, who had somehow materialized beside him, wearing a cardigan and a smile that could melt granite. "Sheriff," she said in that syrupy tone of hers, "Josh here's been under a lot of stress. He must have forgotten the arrangement we made before he left. The HOA has a temporary stewardship policy for absentee owners. Everything's documented." She produced a neatly stapled stack of papers that looked disturbingly official. My signature was at the bottom of one of them, my handwriting or something that could have fooled my own mother. The sheriff sighed, rubbed his temple, and handed the papers back. "Look, sir," he said to me, I'm not here to decide property disputes at 11 o'clock at night. If she's got documents, you'll have to take it up with the county court. For now, I can't remove those guests without a court order." "So you're telling me," I said slowly, feeling the anger boil up my throat, "that I can't go into my own house because some woman forged my name on a piece of paper?" He looked uncomfortable. "I'm telling you to handle it through legal channels." Karen gave me a sympathetic little pat on the arm, as if I were a confused old man who'd lost his keys. "Don't worry, Josh," she said. "Everything's under control. We're taking care of your place." "Taking care of it?" I snapped. "You're running a hotel out of it." Her smile didn't falter. "We prefer the term short-term rental. It's perfectly above board." By the time the sheriff left, I was shaking with fury. The Toyota was still in my driveway, the music still playing inside what used to be my peaceful retreat. I drove to a cheap roadside motel 10 miles away, dropped onto the hard bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My home, my sanctuary, had become someone else's vacation rental, and the law, for now, was on her side. But as I lay there listening to the hum of the broken air conditioner, one thought cut through the rage like a knife. She had forged my signature, and that meant I'd eventually have her cornered. The next morning, sunlight poured through the dusty motel blinds and landed right on my face, pulling me out of an hour's worth of miserable sleep. I rolled over, the smell of stale air and detergent clinging to the sheets, and tried to convince myself that last night had just been some elaborate nightmare. Then I checked my phone. 17 notifications from my smart doorbell camera, all timestamps from the past 2 weeks. Every single one showed people hauling luggage through my front door, laughing, snapping selfies, acting like my lake house was some budget resort. The last clip nearly made me throw the phone. Karen herself wearing gardening gloves, walking a couple around my living room as if she were a realtor. I showered in the motel's lukewarm water, grabbed the free coffee that tasted like wet cardboard, and headed straight for my storage unit where I kept copies of every important document: mortgage, deed, tax receipts. I drove with the kind of tight, quiet fury that makes your hands tremble on the wheel. At the unit, I dug through boxes until I found the brown envelope marked Property Lakeview. Everything was there, notarized, legitimate. My name, my signature. No mention of Karen, no clause about temporary management. Back in town, I went straight to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a bored woman with glasses perched low on her nose, flipped through digital records on her screen and frowned. "Huh," she said. "There's a note added to your file from 3 weeks ago. Says you granted power of attorney to a Ms. Karen Prescott for short-term property management while out of state." I felt my pulse in my ears. "That's a lie," I said. "Can I see it?" She printed it out and slid it across the counter. There it was, the same neat stack of legal-looking papers I'd seen last night. Same forged signature. My name, written just wrong enough to make my stomach twist. I called my attorney, a man named Dale who had handled my house closing years ago. He listened in silence, then said, "Josh, whatever this is, it's serious. Bring everything you have to my office. Don't confront her again without me." An hour later, I was sitting in his office, handing over the forged documents and my own originals. He studied both sets, then leaned back in his chair. "This isn't amateur hour. Whoever did this used real templates. Looks like something pulled from an old property management contract. And this signature, it's not a copy-paste. It's traced by hand. They probably scanned a legitimate form you signed before and repurposed it." "You're saying she broke into my house," I said quietly. He nodded. "That's the only way she could have gotten a clean sample." I thought back to the one room I never locked. My office. I kept an old file cabinet there with scanned PDFs of all my contracts. A cold realization crawled up my spine. She'd been inside before this even started. That night I went back to the property, not to go in but to check the perimeter. The renters had left for dinner, their SUV gone. I crouched by the back window and peered in. Everything was rearranged. My books were stacked by color, my grandfather's fishing rod mounted like decoration, and someone had put throw pillows that said lake life on the couch. It was my home, and yet it wasn't. I moved around the side yard to the small tool shed and pried open the paneling behind it. Before leaving for the Texas job, I'd installed a tiny security camera there, one that uploaded footage to a private cloud. It wasn't linked to my main system, just a quiet precaution after a few package thefts last year. I pulled out my laptop in the truck, connected to the hotspot, and started watching. The footage loaded slowly, but then there she was, Karen, 2 weeks ago, entering through the back door with a man I didn't recognize. She walked straight to my office, unlocked my cabinet with a key, and started flipping through my documents. Her companion set up a portable scanner. Karen smiled for the camera without realizing it existed, holding up the forged power of attorney form like a trophy. I replayed that clip 5 times, each one making my blood run colder. She hadn't just lied. She'd planned this down to the last inch. I downloaded every file, time-stamped, and backed it up on multiple drives. Then I drove to Dale's house, banged on his door, and handed him the laptop. He watched the clip once, then looked at me with the kind of tight, restrained satisfaction lawyers get before a fight. "This," he said, "is evidence of forced entry, document theft, and forgery. We're filing both civil and criminal complaints. Don't do anything rash. She's already hung herself, you just don't know it yet." When I pulled back into the motel parking lot, I finally exhaled. Through the window, I could see the lake shimmering in the distance, calm and silver in the dusk. Somewhere across that water, tourists were sleeping in my bed, and Karen probably thought she'd pulled off the perfect con. I set the laptop on the nightstand, hit play on the security clip one more time, and smiled without humor. The camera she'd never noticed was going to ruin her entire empire. By the time Saturday rolled around, the situation had taken a turn from legally infuriating to outright surreal. I was halfway through my motel breakfast, soggy waffles and a rubbery boiled egg, when my phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. "Dude, you're on the news?" Attached was a blurry screenshot of my house on the local station's morning segment. I pulled up the video. There she was, Karen Prescott, in all her self-righteous glory, standing in front of my porch like she was campaigning for sainthood. Microphone in hand, local reporter beaming. "This is Lakeview's very own community guardian," the anchor said. Karen stepped up to manage an abandoned property that was attracting complaints, ensuring the neighborhood stayed clean and safe. Karen smiled like someone accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. "The owner left quite suddenly," she said. "No contact info, no emergency numbers. I was afraid squatters or vandals might target the property, so I took initiative. All proceeds from short-term rentals go toward neighborhood maintenance and HOA landscaping efforts." I nearly choked on my coffee. She'd made herself the hero of the story, and she was good at it. She even had a fake GoFundMe set up for community beautification, where she directed Airbnb guests to donate as part of their stay experience. I clicked the link. Over-earned $5,000 Kakora raised in 2 weeks. But the worst part wasn't the lie. It was the comments. Finally, someone doing something useful for the community. "Owners who abandon property should forfeit it. She's a badass. Can we vote Karen into city council already?" They were eating it up. I scrolled through her Facebook page and found a series of curated posts about the house. Photos of smiling renters on the porch with captions like, "Another happy guest thanks to Lakeview Cares." She even included fake before photos which were clearly taken in bad lighting to make the house look like a haunted meth den before her miraculous renovation. But it wasn't just Facebook. She had a whole Airbnb business profile. Under the name Lakeview Hospitality LLC, which had been registered legitimately according to Dale's records only a month before I left for Texas. The listing for my home was professionally written, filled with phrases like quaint escape, lakeside serenity, and community-managed comfort. She'd posted over 30 photos, many of which showed my personal belongings rearranged for aesthetic effect. My grandmother's antique lamp was now a vintage touch. My fishing trophies were local flavor. I checked the calendar. Every weekend for the next 6 weeks was booked solid. But here's where things got interesting. Dale had hired a digital forensics consultant named Marcus, a quiet guy with sharp eyes and fingers that moved faster than his mouth. He pulled up the Airbnb financial records, followed the trails to the GoFundMe, then cross-referenced with the IRS Public Nonprofit Registry. Lakeview Cares wasn't registered as any kind of nonprofit or civic organization. It was just a name, a brand. And all the money? Going straight to Karen's personal checking account under a pseudonym she'd used before in an old HOA legal dispute. Marcus didn't even crack a smile. She's good, not great, definitely bold. He built a timeline and asset trail, Airbnb payments, guest reviews, payout logs, and GoFundMe transactions, all tied directly to Karen's personal financial activity. When he finished, he looked up and said, "You realize this is tax fraud, wire fraud, probably mail fraud if she sent any notices using the postal system." Dale grinned like a shark sniffing blood. "We're adding it to the civil suit, but we're also submitting this packet to the IRS whistleblower division. If they bite, they'll go after her harder than we can." I nodded, still trying to process how this woman had turned my entire life into her personal theme park while also branding herself a local savior. But I wasn't angry anymore. No, what I felt now was focus. She wanted this to be public. Fine. I'd give her exactly what she asked for, just not on her terms. Later that night, I watched her go live on Facebook again. This time, she stood in front of my house with a glass of wine, waving to the camera. "We're booked solid through July," she bragged. "People love what we've done with the place. Next week, we're starting community yoga on the lawn." I smirked. She had no idea the video footage of her breaking into my office was now in the hands of 2 different attorneys and a former IRS agent. And if she wanted to win this war in public, so be it. The next move was mine. Dale didn't waste time. By Monday morning, he'd already drafted the civil complaint. 122 pages with exhibits, time logs, screenshots, and more paper than most divorces produce. The damages estimate totaled on $500,000. Loss of use, illegal income from unauthorized rental, emotional distress, legal costs, and punitive damages. That number wasn't a guess, it was a bullet aimed straight at the center of Karen's fantasy economy. But he didn't stop there. No. Dale wanted teeth. So he submitted a full dossier to the IRS whistleblower office. Anonymously flagged, pointing out that Karen had not only been running an unlicensed rental business, but also collecting charitable donations through GoFundMe without registering any nonprofit. According to Marcus, that crossed several lines: charity fraud, unreported income, and misuse of a platform to solicit funds under false pretenses. And then, just to twist the knife, Dale filed a preliminary injunction to freeze any and all rental activity tied to the property until the case could be resolved in court. Airbnb responded with their usual robotic stance. "We respect all ongoing legal matters and require formal court rulings for any account actions." Typical. but it meant the clock was ticking and Karen didn't even know it yet. Meanwhile, I was still stuck in that motel, drinking bitter coffee and watching people enjoy what used to be my backyard from my doorbell camera like some kind of sad reverse voyeur. That's when I decided to pay the place a visit, not to enter, not yet, but to plant a little seed. I printed out the notice of pending litigation, official and dry, and tacked it right onto the mailbox, laminated in plastic. It wasn't legally required, but it would raise eyebrows. I knew renters would see it, maybe even start asking questions. Karen wouldn't like that one bit. Sure enough, later that evening she called me. I let it go to voicemail, but her message was practically vibrating with faux concern. "Josh, darling, I saw you left something on the mailbox. Now I know things have been confusing, but you're only making yourself look hostile. Remember, we both want what's best for the neighborhood. Let's not escalate." Translation: I was making her nervous. Dale, however, wanted escalation. The very next day, he filed a formal motion to subpoena Karen's financial records, including those of Lakeview Hospitality LLC and her GoFundMe transactions. The judge hadn't ruled yet, but Marcus had already found at least 4 personal bank accounts linked to the same phone number she used on Airbnb. Then came the real gift: a local CPA, someone Karen had stiffed on consulting fees, contacted Dale and offered copies of internal documents. He had helped her set up Lakeview Hospitality, but jumped ship when she refused to report rental income to the IRS. She said the house wasn't hers, so technically it wasn't income. It was just community redistribution. Her words, not mine. That phrase was too poetic to be invented. With this new evidence in hand, Dale sent a pre-litigation demand letter to Karen's attorney. It was a masterpiece of calm threat, outlining the civil claims, the pending IRS referral, the financial tracing, and even hinting that the DA's office had been notified. It was all true or close enough to hurt. We expected silence. Instead, we got a counteroffer. Karen's lawyer sent back a 2-line email. "My client is willing to cease rental operations and pay a modest settlement for misunderstanding. Proposal: $15,000. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my phone. Dale didn't even blink. "She's bluffing. They're testing the water. She doesn't realize how screwed she is yet." I wanted to reply myself. I wanted to send her a picture of my face and a middle finger. But I didn't. Because Dale was right. She had no idea the fuse had already been lit. Later that week, the sheriff's office contacted Dale. Not me. Dale. That was how I knew the game had changed. Someone from the Joe County Fraud Division wanted to meet. Turns out the IRS had flagged the financial dossier for a deeper audit and referred it to local authorities. They were now formally looking into financial misrepresentation, wire fraud, and misuse of charitable platforms. The sheriff, who had once turned me away from my own front door, now had a case file with Karen's name on it. That night, as I lay in my motel bed, I finally started to breathe again. Not because it was over, it wasn't, not by a long shot, but because I could see it just over the horizon. The moment this whole thing would come crashing down on her head. And I was going to make damn sure I had front row seats. It was around midnight when the video finally went public. We'd been sitting on it for weeks, watching Karen spin her version of events to anyone with a microphone or a Facebook login. She was still hosting guests, still giving neighborhood tours, still sipping Chardonnay in lawn chairs that didn't belong to her. But the clock was running out. The timing had to be perfect. Dale coordinated the release like a general plotting an ambush. First, a leak to a local journalist he trusted, someone with a blog, decent reach, and a love for scandal. Then a quiet drop on Reddit. Our legal advice, complete with an anonymous post titled, "HOA president forged documents, took over my house and rented it out. Video evidence inside. The clip was just under 2 minutes. Silent, grainy, but powerful. It opened with Karen walking into my home. No knock, no key under the mat, just a clear, casual entry through the back door. She was wearing gloves and sunglasses indoors like someone halfway between a burglar and a soap opera villain. With her was a man I later learned was a freelance notary who'd lost his license 3 years ago. They walked into my office, opened my file cabinet, and began flipping through folders. Karen pulled out a property form, compared signatures on her phone, and started tracing mine onto a blank authorization document. The camera caught the angle just right, her hand shaking slightly, the pen scratching like a nervous insect. Her accomplice fed the fake through a portable scanner. Then the line that would go viral. "Well, if he didn't want me to take care of the place," she muttered, "he shouldn't have left it unlocked like a fool." She chuckled. Fade to black. The response online was immediate. Comments poured in. Lawyers, landlords, digital vigilantes, even bored suburban moms, it didn't matter. The internet had seen the real Karen, and they were hungry for blood. The blog post from the local journalist went live 3 hours later. HOA president exposed. Leaked footage shows. Forgery, fraud, and Airbnb empire built on lies. It was over. I was woken the next morning by a phone call from Marcus. "Turn on Channel 8, he said. "Right now." Karen was on screen again, only this time she wasn't glowing. Her hair was frizzy, her mouth tight, her eyes moving like she was reading a teleprompter with no punctuation. "I deeply regret any misunderstanding that may have arisen," she said. "My intention was only ever to protect the integrity of the neighborhood." The camera panned to a group of angry residents behind her, some holding printouts of the Reddit post, others just shaking their heads. One man shouted, "You broke into his house, Karen." Another added, "We trusted you." She tried to smile. It didn't work. Later that afternoon, Dale received a panicked letter from Karen's attorney. The tone had changed entirely. No more offers, no more bravado. Now it was full of phrases like de-escalation, amicable resolution, and my personal favorite, willingness to engage in good faith negotiation. But it was too late. The digital tsunami kept rolling. One of the renters, a college student from Florida, messaged me privately to apologize. He'd thought it was a normal listing. "She told us you were her ex-husband who abandoned the house," he wrote. "I'm really sorry, man. She even staged your photos in the closet to look like junk." I thanked him and asked if he'd testify if it came to that. He said yes. Karen tried to claw her way back online. She deleted her Facebook profile, then reopened it under a new name, Lakeview Wellness Coordinator. Like anyone was going to fall for that. Someone screenshotted it and posted it to Twitter with the caption, "Karen, the rebrand." It got over 40,000 likes in one night. Then came the cherry on top. Dale received confirmation that the Yo court had accepted our digital evidence went into the civil suit. More importantly, the sheriff's office requested a conformal copy of the original footage. It was now part of a growing case file that included an unauthorized entry, forgery, fraud, and misuse of personal information. Karen's empire, her fragile, curated lie, was crumbling fast. But I wasn't done watching. That evening, I sat back in the motel chair, glass of bourbon in hand, and hit replay on the footage. I watched her trace my name, smug and oblivious, believing she'd outsmarted everyone. I watched the moment she leaned back in my chair like she owned the place. Then I clicked pause. That one frame, the exact second she smiled, would soon be part of a courtroom projector screen. And I'd be sitting front row when it lit up. The courthouse smelled like stale air and polished regret. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, eyes forward, heart pounding slow but heavy. It had taken months to get here. Months of legal filings, subpoenas, silent buildup, and loud online chaos. But now we were in the real arena, where the walls didn't care about hashtags or HOA gossip. Only facts. Only law. Karen entered with her lawyer trailing behind her like a leashless dog. She wore beige. Of course she wore beige, the color of denial and fake innocence. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight, hair pulled so severely back it looked like it hurt. She didn't even glance my way. The courtroom was half full, some reporters, a few neighbors, even the college kid from Florida who'd flown back in just to testify. I gave him a small nod. He smiled and shrugged like, "Can you believe this shit?" Judge Mallory, an older woman with razor-sharp posture, took the bench. The room settled into quiet. My attorney, Dale, opened like a veteran boxer, calm, precise, no wasted movements. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about the theft of something more than property. It's about deception, forgery, and a systematic abuse of legal and community mechanisms to enrich oneself at the expense of another." He let that hang, then walked the court through the timeline like a slow, methodical gut punch. Every false claim, every forged paper, every bank deposit from Airbnb, every selfie posted by Karen's guests standing in front of my fireplace like it was Disneyland. When Karen's lawyer had the floor, he tried to reframe it. Ms. Prescott acted with the sincere belief that she was protecting the neighborhood from decay and dereliction. Her intentions were honorable, if perhaps administratively aggressive. Administratively aggressive. I almost laughed. But the real storm hit when we played the footage. The courtroom lights dimmed. Dale loaded the video on the projector. That same 2-minute clip I'd watched a dozen times now. Karen breaking in, Karen forging, Karen scanning. The judge watched without blinking. Karen sat stone still, only her fingers twitching. Then we dropped the financial reports. Marcus had traced over than $36,000 in unreported income over 6 weeks. Airbnb payments, GoFundMe withdrawals, peer-to-peer transfers between her personal account and a shell LLC. All documented, all time-stamped, all irrefutable. Karen's lawyer requested a recess. Denied. Next came the surprise testimony, the notary who'd scanned the forged documents. Dale had tracked him down. He looked like a man who'd eaten a plate of broken glass that morning. Nervous, sweating, but honest. She paid me $200 to notarize the form. I didn't know it was fake. I just needed rent. Then the college student. Then the CPA. Then 2 neighbors who admitted they'd been pressured by Karen to support her narrative or risk being fined by the HOA. One even brought emails where Karen threatened to penalize non-cooperative residents under made-up bylaw numbers. The climax came when Dale introduced a brief from the IRS confirming that an official audit of Karen Prescott had begun and that the civil case findings would be reviewed for potential non-criminal referral. That part wasn't just the nail in the coffin. It was the whole damn tombstone. When the closing statements ended, Judge Mallory didn't adjourn immediately. She looked directly at Karen. "I've seen a lot in my time," she said, voice steady. "But I've rarely seen such a calculated abuse of authority, of trust, and of someone's home. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an orchestrated scheme for profit wrapped in the language of community service. She ruled in our favor. Full damages awarded. $475,000. Additional penalties, legal fees. Karen ordered to relinquish any digital listing rights, cease all rental activity, and most poetic of all, write a formal apology letter. To every single renter she'd misled and every neighbor she'd manipulated. But that wasn't the end. A deputy approached her right there in court. Quiet, professional, gloves on. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to come with us." Karen's face cracked for the first time. I saw it happen in real time. The control shatter. She stammered something about legal misunderstanding as they guided her out, not in cuffs, not yet. But close. Very close. I sat there in the emptying courtroom, finally exhaling, fingers light, chest hollow and full at the same time. Dale clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you," he said. "She hung herself. We just gave her the rope." 6 months later, the lake was calm again. The same sunlight that once glinted off Karen's wine glass now shimmered on the water without pretense. No cameras, no reporters, no HOA drama clinging to the neighborhood like mildew. Just the sound of birds, a soft breeze, and the occasional laughter of real friends. The front lawn of my house looked better than it had in years. Fresh sod, native plants, trimmed hedges, and a new mailbox that was deliberately, defiantly the wrong shade of HOA-approved beige. I had it custom painted in fire engine red and no one said a word. Karen's rules had died with her title. That afternoon we threw a party. I'd sent out invites to everyone in the neighborhood except one. They brought food, music, chairs, and the kind of relief that comes only after surviving shared absurdity. Someone set up a grill. Kids ran through sprinklers on the lawn she once swore was common area landscaping. It felt like a wake for a particularly obnoxious era. I gave a toast near the porch. "Thanks to all of you who stood by me, and thanks to those who didn't, because you taught me what silence costs." That got a few nervous laughs and even more applause. I took special joy watching the new HOA president, a young mom named Lacey, pass around homemade lemonade and swear she would never, under any circumstances, rule the block with a clipboard. Later, as dusk rolled in, I noticed a new metal sign hanging near the front steps. It read, "Now renting, but only to good people who bring cookies." That was Lacey's idea. She thought we could reclaim the vibe. I left it up. By the fire pit, the Florida college kid Ethan tossed me a beer. He'd driven in again for the weekend just to be here. "You ever think about actually renting it now? You'd probably make a killing." I laughed. "I might, but I'd rather make friends than profits for a while." He nodded and grinned. "Well, if you need a 5-star review from someone who got conned, I'm your guy." At some point, I wandered to the edge of the property and looked across the lake. On the opposite shore stood a modest house with a for sale sign out front. The once proud banner that read "Lakeview Rentals" by Karen had been ripped down weeks ago. The grass was overgrown, windows shuttered, her empire reduced to a listing no one wanted to touch. The IRS had hit her with fines. The state took interest after the court ruling. Her accounts were frozen, and last I heard, her lawyer had dropped her for communication failures. The neighborhood didn't even whisper her name anymore. It was like she'd been redacted from the collective memory. Back at the party, Sheriff Douglas showed up in plain clothes. He handed me a gift bag and said, "I owe you one." Inside was a photo frame. In it, a printed copy of the county land record with a giant red stamp. "Owner confirmed." Underneath, he'd scribbled, "Next time we check the damn camera first." As the sun disappeared and fairy lights flickered to life around the porch, someone put on music. Not loud, not rowdy, just good old rock that made people sway and sing. For the first time in a long time, my house didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home. And if I ever decided to rent it again, it'd be on my terms, with cookies required.